Here's a question for you. Has the King, King Charles III, the current one, has he just committed treason against his people? We've just seen him recently in May, beginning of May, having his coronation and taking the oath against all the tyrannies of the world to guard and protect the people with its traditions and customs. We heard him say it. They had the big pomp and ceremony. And then all of a sudden, we know that he was in with the Great Reset and the WEF and all those people. And he said before he became king, when he became king, he would have to drop all of this nonsense and he would concentrate being a monarch. And obviously looking after the interests of his people, which is us, his sovereign people. Well, has he? Not if it goes by what happened in the news yesterday, I think it was. And I was sent this particular newspaper, okay, it is the Daily Mail. But look at this. King Charles joins London Mayor Sadiq Khan at the launch of the National Climate Clock, which warns there are little more than 6 years left for the world to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And here we go. King Charles, there he is, at this event with the Mayor of London, who, other than being the Mayor of London, I don't know what he has to do with the rest of the country or any of our other policies, but there he is with the Mayor of London setting off the climate clock, counting down 6 years, 24 days, and it says on there 1 hour and 18 minutes and 39 seconds. So that we have, within that time, we've got to get down to this ridiculous 1.5 degrees of CO2. There we are, look, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And there is this clock, which, of course, we now know is going to be spouted about everywhere. And look, very powerfully chat with Sadiq Khan at the end there. And this is very worrying, I think, because there is now, it would seem, no room for manoeuvre, no room for argument, no room for anybody, those scientists who disagree with the notion that man-made climate change anything to do with man, that CO2 is a problem for the world, and particularly in this country. I mean, even if it was, we produce, something like 1% of the world's carbon. So what the hell are we punishing ourselves to getting rid of even more carbon, and when the rest of the world are not doing it? I mean, what kind of stupid example are we giving when we are basically committing suicide in front of the rest of the world when they're not bothered one way or another building more power stations, coal-fired power stations or fossil fuel power stations? And why should other countries who don't have a lot of money and don't have the luxuries of the West and the industrialization why should they not be able to do that? And they're doing it, and yet we're penalizing ourselves, going along this very dangerous path, which is also a huge myth, in my humble opinion. Now, you can see I'm quite agitated about this. I've just been to the Groundswell Regenerative Agricultural Festival, which is a festival celebrating farmers who are trying to find innovative ways to grow food. And it seems the main message, again, was they've got to offset their carbon, as if everyone has just bought into this complete myth that you've got to offset your carbon or you've got to capture your carbon, and if you don't get the subsidies, or you won't get the bank loans, you won't get the assistance and the help from DEFRA and the government to get you off the ground farming. And of course, at the Great Rising event, you may, if you weren't attended or if you have heard a little bit about it, David Laity, ex-detective who's been snooping around in Cornwall, said that actually the plan in Cornwall, and this is going to be the blueprint across the land, is to rewild all the farms and get rid of farming altogether. And not only will the land be rewild, it won't be for the public to access access, because obviously if the public go in that land, you won't be able to keep the diversity of species in there. So people will have to just be forced, corralled into these little ghettos where they can stay and, of course, eat, well, what? Not food, because we won't be farming food, but actually synthetic burgers, care of a Mr. Gates. Not sure about that. But the science itself is incredibly dubious. It's not everybody who agrees with it. Bit like during the pandemic when a so-called something or other was the science, and we only had to follow one science, we had to have one medical treatment, and now of course we discovered actually the science and everything that was based on was very shaky, very dodgy, and that came from the same type of organisation that is telling us that we've got to go to net zero. You know, the World Health Organization and the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and the people that are backing that financially. These one world government ideas, which actually is telling us what we should be doing, and yet they're making so many mistakes and getting the science wrong because they're backing the wrong science. I mean, there's a report in this very reliable paper that actually tells you the truth about what's going on, and that is The Light. If you haven't had a copy of The Light, do go to thelight.co.uk, I think it is, or just put in The Light newspaper. It'll come up in your search engine of choice. No climate crisis, it is reporting. Read the whole thing. Climate dioxide has zero effect on the temperatures, and then it produces some reliable graphs for you to see exactly what's going on. The information that, of course, is the same information from the IPCC, but is being interpreted extremely differently by other media organisations, and particularly our monarch, the King, King Charles III, who is forcing this country down a route which means that we will have some form of, as you can bet your bottom dollar, a carbon credit associated with everything you do. Like a social credit, a carbon credit. And once those CBDCs, those central bank digital currencies, come in and you've got your digital ID, they'll all be linked together, and we'll end up like those Chinese states that have the ability with the biometrics. You've probably seen it in the supermarkets and the cameras and the ULEZ stuff, where they're watching you, they're filming you, they're capturing your image, they're capturing your gait. By that I mean how you walk, and they're building up this database so that they can identify you. If you go to the bank and you want to put a little bit more diesel into your vehicle, oh no, you can't do that if you, of course, eaten too much meat, because it seems that meat is one of those things that animals, cattle and pigs and cows are producing far too much methane, and the food stock for feeding them is also producing too many nitrates. It's all bringing in the carbon, and we've got to take this evasive action. And it is totally preposterous. It is totally suicide. We are at just under, I believe, 0.04% of carbon in the atmosphere. That's around about 400 parts per million. And if we start reducing that down and you get to about 0.02% of the carbon, that's 0.02. That's a very tiny amount of carbon, and we're very close to that at 0.04. That's 200 parts per million. Well, plants die. And if plants die, then animals feeding those plants die. And we've been recommended that we should be eating more plants. But if you're going to actually reduce the gas that is the gas of life that grows plants, guess who is the carbon who's going to be reduced in this planet? Guess who is going to not be here to eat the mealworms and the synthetic burgers? Yeah, it'll be us. So this is an incredibly dangerous and suicide policy, in my humble opinion. You may disagree. Maybe you're somebody who has swallowed hook, line and sinker what the government says. Oh yes, we've got to get to net zero by 2030. Well, you can tune in. I don't know where it is, probably online somewhere. Someone will have it, the URL to the countdown clock. But believe you me, we'll start to see that now. And you know what will happen? I can guess already. The government, who've managed to get us to tune our phones in to their urgent messages now, will no doubt start to get little reminders from them, I dare say, saying, oh, you've got to reduce your carbon. Don't forget to recycle. And we know that half the recycling isn't done properly anyway. So what's the point? So my question to you is, has King Charles committed treason? King Charles III. And if he has, well, we know what happened to King Charles I. It didn't end well with him. And I have a sneaky feeling that once the people wake up, this may not end well for King Charles III, because when people realise they're being pushed into a communist Chinese type situation with carbon credits, I think they might turn round on the monarch and say, do you know what? A bit like Alice in Wonderland with the Queen going around saying, off with his head.